Hello, this is Ed Hamler with your World in Review. Last week, the freak out in Europe over the collapse of the EU system came to a head when it was reported by the European press that the entire European system could collapse by Christmas, which is in about 2 weeks. As we should know by now, the collapse of the inter-alpha group of banks is the issue here, and while Greece, Ireland, and others have been hit very hard, Portugal and Spain are up next in line. And we already know the kind of austerity and pro-imperialist policies now being shoved down the throats of the peoples of the EU. So what came out of Europe last week was not something just to be reported on in the press. It's more serious. And it's an indication of the kinds of decisions leaders of nations need to make if civilization as a whole is to survive. It's the kind of situation that was typified by the fall of the Soviet Union, which quite literally happened overnight. And all of a sudden, there was no system and barely any governments to speak of in Europe. There were only two directions at that point for mankind: to go with the pro-developmental policies of the Strategic Triangle and the Eurasian Land Bridge proposed by Lyndon and Helge LaRouche at that time, or to go with the snakes, Britain's imperial policy of the European Monetarist Union. Needless to say that the wrong choice was made. An entire system got wiped out, and what was put in its place was the now defunct European Monetary Union, which destroyed Europe and whose collapse now threatens the entire global system. So the point is that there are times in history where the usual discussion of politics and the usual economic chatter doesn't mean a damn thing. What matters is leaders of nations making the right choice for a successful creation for a future for mankind. And the moment for that choice is now, and it must be made by Christmas. Now, as we take our usual survey of the world, let's return to an item we reported on this morning. As far as the Irish bailout situation goes, the British, via the EU, have exposed themselves as utterly desperate and have resorted to all kinds of backroom deals to ram the bailout through. Various EU officials were caught trying to console bondholders of banks and also hedge fund managers this morning, promising them that the current government of Ireland and any government that comes into power will not be given the authority to remove the protection given to senior bondholders of banks. Now, since the time we reported on that item, the situation has gotten even messier. Irish Taoiseach Brian Cowen has made himself an ass fit for the British Empire. At today's vote on the budget, put it on full display for all to see. The second stage of the Irish austerity budget passed, again by the slimmest margins, 76 to 72. The Fianna Fáil had a parliamentary caucus this morning and voted unanimously to vote on the IMF-EU deal in the Dáil next Wednesday. The Irish Parliament's $8 billion package of spending cuts and tax hikes are said to be designed to deal with Ireland's current debt crisis and to qualify for the European Union bailout, which is why they're doing it. But we know that the effect of this policy will kill the Irish people off, and it will also hand the Irish nation back over to the British. That's what's really going on. The $8 billion is the first installment of $20 billion that will be required over the next 3 years. Brian Cowen retained the leadership of the party, but just barely. Today, he proclaimed that the vote will give certainty to the world that the deal has been confirmed by the Parliament. But what he forgot to mention, if indeed he's actually aware of it, is that the certainty that he's speaking of will only reassure people that he is a British tool. As the situation in Ireland continues, the fight too will continue, because once I tell people what's going on even further, they will definitely be up in arms. Today in the Financial Times, in a piece called Eurozone Crisis Boosts Default Swaps, uncovers more of the utter rape being perpetrated by the financiers in the name of economics. The Times reports that over the past year, that is, during the escalating crisis of the Eurozone, there's been big business in credit default swaps, as the sheer volume of these financial instruments has increased. Between Ireland, Greece, Portugal, and Spain, the volume of CDSs has increased by 48%. And to top it off, the CDS markets now make up about 30% of the size of the bond markets, compared with just 5% a year ago. CDSs are speculators' insurance policy against sovereign debt, like bonds. It allows them to gamble and not have to worry about taking a loss. What this means is that CDSs are financial instruments that say no matter what happens to the real economy of a nation, we're insured, so we get paid. Even if the value of the debt, as in the case of the Eurozone countries, is disintegrating, we still get paid. Even the bond the insurance is based on, even if that is worthless, then they say, cut the budget, because this CDS I own says that I'm insured, so the people can go to hell and you can pay me. Now, whether Brian Cowan knows it or not, this is where the bailout money is going, to the inner alpha group of banks that perpetrates this. And this will definitely cause the suicide of his own people, whether he knows it or not, at the hands of the British monetarist interest, typified by the swindle of the CDS market. Now, this is the kind of stuff that was made legal as a result of the repeal of glass-steagall in the United States. So it goes without question that we need to re-implement that policy now immediately, and also strike agreements with Europe to make this apply internationally to save these nations. But there is just one complication in making that happen. It's called the United States leadership. While Europe is disintegrating, the leadership here has reduced itself to squabbling about various kinds of issues, like who or what even will get certain positions in the new government come January. But also other, perhaps well-meaning issues have come up, but don't correspond actually to the real timetable that we're talking about here. Although you've got some fight in the Congress right now against Obama's tax cuts and cuts to entitlements, the president himself is the chief impediment to any progress at home and even abroad. And unless you get this guy out of office, you're just going to be whistling Dixie. For example, earlier today we reported on Obama virtually destroying the potential for a Middle East peace, and in fact even facilitating a war in that region. Tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary of the day that Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize for claiming that he would be the savior that would bring about a Middle East peace. Well, 1 year later, we have found that the Middle East peace process has collapsed. Just 1 month before the Israel-Palestine talks were to take place, a deal between Benjamin Netanyahu and Obama was struck and it leaked out. In exchange for a 90-day settlement freeze in the West Bank, the U.S. would give Israel 20 F-35 fighter jets. Netanyahu pressed Obama to add an additional measure, allowing Israel to continue building an East Israel. As we already reported, this has been seen and rightly understood by intelligence members and also government officials around the world as permission for Israel to launch a strike on Palestine, which is just as insane as our illustrious president. A potential war in the Middle East, the collapse of the global economic system, and a bailout of the inter-alpha group? Sounds British, doesn't it? Well, that's because it is British. And that is the rightful enemy that we have to defeat right now.